Today's webinar, Top 15 for 16, is presented by Bullett and Kalev Peekna. Jen is the Managing Director of Marketing and Talent here at One North, working closely with the brand, strategy, creative, and technology teams to develop and enhance One North client communications and exterior messaging strategy. Kalev is the Chief Strategist at One North, leading the development of new capabilities that bring together brand, creative, strategy, UX, and technology. With that, I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thanks, Kayla. We're really excited for today's webinar. We always love the trends presentation to kick off our webinar schedule for the year. And typically when we're doing a webinar around trends, we have in the past really focused on the digital aspects of what's happening from a trend perspective. But this year we decided to take a little bit of a broader view, and we looked across sort of all industries, marketing, business, digital, customer-focused trends to kind of come up with some of the key elements that we think are really impactful for our clients. So we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to get right into it, but just so that to set some expectations, we sort of have 8 key trends, and we're going to start off with some of the macro views and move down into sort of the digital details. So, we'll cover everything from brands to millennials to marketing strategies, orchestration and marketing automation, and then end up on sort of the nitty-gritty details of what's going on people's websites and throughout their digital strategies.
Yeah, I think one of the overarching things to think from all of this is that digital's not being done in a silo. It's not anymore. And so what we've done in the trends is really try to connect the broader business development and marketing milieu, like what's going on in the broader sense, and bring in digital as part of that story.
So we'll get started with brands. So brand is always a tricky topic. It can often be sort of seen as a dirty word, but it's back, and it's back in a pretty big way. And it's really interesting from our perspective because for those of us who were sort of working in digital and B2B marketing back in sort of 2008 time period, we saw a real shift away from brand, sort of a cutback from investing in brand and focusing on, more business development or tactical elements of marketing communications. But what we're seeing now is that, with a little bit of the recession in hindsight and businesses starting to feel better about, what the future is looking like, and also changes in sort of client needs, there's a shift back to investing in brands, specifically in the B2B space. So, a few things to talk about in terms of brand is, brand now encompasses a lot. It is your strategy, it is the call to actions that you use, it's how you service your clients, it's the way you speak about yourself. It's all the communication tools that you use. It's the people that you hire to be part of your company. It's the experience that clients have in your offices or with you, in whatever form. And, by the way, it's also your logo and your visuals. I think so often people start with the last one and then work their way into sort of a strategy, and I think that the new shift that we're seeing with this focus on brand is the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think it's really great. I think a couple of years ago when we worked with people and inquired about brand, people almost always assumed we were talking about the logo or maybe the color palette, and if we asked for brand guidelines, we got those helpful specifications about those visual elements, but we were always interested in everything else, right? And then that actually being the brand. But I think what's changed is that everybody's now realizing the brand is really that core essence. And your logo, your colors, the specific words you choose, those are all just how you express it.
Which is not surprising that I think of all the sort of trends that we're seeing as it relates to brand, I think the most fundamental one is this idea of being authentic in how you create your brand, but also how it connects you with your audiences, with your markets. I think that there's a sense today of sort of being very clear about who you are and what you do best, because in some ways, customers have changed and they want not only authenticity, they want transparency. And what we've seen that happen is that, if what you're saying about yourself and the experience that a customer has with you is out of sync, you've lost all brand equity.
Yeah, it raises that obvious question, like, what are you being authentic to? I mean, I think we can all agree that authenticity is a good thing. Nobody will go to market and say, I'm going to be inauthentic now. But you have to know what you're being authentic to, and you can't be authentic to a logo or to a color, right? Like, that core has to be defined in a way that authenticity is actually possible.
The good news for us marketers is that when you're actually able to define something that's authentic and you're actually able to live up to that authenticity, there are actually business impacts. This is a really interesting index that was done by the Authentic Brand Index, which sort of talks about, and I think this is really interesting for relationship businesses in particular, when a brand has a very strong, authentic core message, the likelihood that a customer would be willing to recommend that brand increases, and also the fact that they're sort of willing to, that they have a high value view of that brand also increases. And, one of the things that we talked about in the slide that sort of said what brand is employees. One of the big trends that I'm seeing for sure, but that we're seeing across the board, is employees. How do you recruit them? How do you keep them? I think that, human capital is probably one of the elements that keeps most CEOs up at night. Mm-hmm. And part of our jobs now as marketers or business people is to take that authentic brand and use it in a way to attract the next generation. And you'll find, as this is happening, that the pool of talent that you're looking at is decreasing. And, so you have to have a very clear value proposition for those individuals. Yeah,
I think that this is one of those things that I think is actually more important for B2B businesses overall than B2C businesses. I mean, certainly any people-driven business like professional services, I think you can look at this and totally get it, but even broader B2B, I think people are realizing that internal part of employee branding is just as critical. In fact, maybe it's a more critical place to start when launching a brand or working on the brand than the external side.
The tricky thing about employee branding is that there is no clear owner for it, which I think is going to be a real challenging piece. I think it keeps CEOs up at night. There's a sense that the CEO feels like somehow they're responsible for it. Marketing folks are involved, human resources is involved, corporate communication has a view of it. So I think without a clear owner or at least a core team that's really focused on it, it makes it challenging to be thoughtful and productive in this space. But when you are, there are some really, really interesting things that you can do. We're just going to show you one example, which we think is pretty cool.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about the slide, we show that is that, it's the CEO thinks that they own all of it, and then when you ask marketing says the answer is HR and the CEO.
Right.
But oddly not marketing. Right?
Kalev.
I know. I couldn't help it.
Us marketing people are savvy. We like to put it on other people.
I know. I mean, everybody is kind of putting it on other things. I think we've noticed that we are working a lot more with marketing, and I think a lot of marketing departments know that they need to focus in on that.
Yeah.
The internal development of the brand is how you actually achieve authenticity, right?
What's really, just before we go to the next slide, what's really interesting is that I've been involved with the Legal Marketing Association conference this year, and one of the topics that keeps coming up is lateral integration, and it's becoming such an important part of the business development process, and I think that...
So that's the hiring of, other senior practitioners into the business.
Exactly.
How do they integrate into a brand when they're already experienced?
How do you attract the right ones and then onboard them?
Yeah.
So here's a really great example, and I'll let Kalev chime in here as well. This is Boston Consulting Group, who went through sort of, I guess, what you would term a branding exercise, but in this case, they weren't really changing the brand as we might have once sort of known it as in terms of the logo and color palettes and all those kind of things, but they have dramatically changed their message. And this is actually a view of their career section. And they have started to tell this really interesting story about make a difference for your clients, for your society, and the world. So it's this really purposeful statement about what being part of BCG actually means. And they've told this story through the lens of two different consultants that work at BCG, and they told it in a very sort of compelling visual story. I mean, we've talked a lot about storytelling in the past. I think this is one of the best examples of it. So that somebody who's looking at, BCG as a potential place to work, consulting being one of the most difficult, the most challenging markets, they get a good sense of like how they're actually going to live the purpose of BCG.
Yeah, what I think is fascinating about their approach to this is that their approach to expressing this brand is just so story-focused. It's not about the delivering of a message or a tagline. It's about telling a story that lets those aspects of it just come out in a really natural and authentic way, rather than just trying to deliver the message and hit somebody with a pithy tagline or the right color or the right image at a time. And it really permeates how they've transformed everything. What I also think is really interesting is that if you've watched this transformation happen at BCG, I think it started about 1.5 years ago, and has been developing more and more and pushing out to more and more, at least of their digital properties. They started with careers. They actually, which is a tactic that we've seen other firms do too. They develop, message to brands out in careers, focusing in on the people, and then let that core platform permeate outwards for other audiences.
One last thought about sort of employee branding is the fact that, there's so many of the same skill sets that you're using from a marketing standpoint as you use in a recruiting and talent acquisition standpoint. And in the same vein, the skills that you would use to map out a customer experience are the same skills and strategies that you would use to map out a talent and employee relationship. So there's, I think, plenty of overlap in this area, and I think big things to come.
Absolutely.
So finally, as we're wrapping up sort of our thoughts about branding, premium pricing, I mean, one of the reasons that B2B companies, B2C companies have invested heavily in branding is not just things like, bringing on, attracting top employees or, being able to connect with customers, but I think it's also for the purpose of being able to charge higher prices. I think when you have an authentic and differentiated message, it implies a unique value that you're able to deliver to clients in the hopes that they will pay extra for that amount. I think in professional services specifically, this is a tricky part, especially when, it's pretty easy to, not easy, but it's feasible to, offshore parts of pieces of work or have a lower cost provider doing some work. I think that there are pockets of areas where having a strong brand that means something allows you to charge a higher price.
Yep. On to the millennials.
The millennials. So, I mean, we would be remiss if we did not touch on millennials in this presentation. Millennials are absolutely the topic du jour, I think. This is a Google search that I did. I mean, it's just endless, the number of articles.
Crazy kids.
Crazy kids. The number of articles that were published last year about millennials, and the number of infographics, really, that were created around the subject. But just in case you were not swept up in this, the fever of millennials, a few things for you to consider along this millennial madness is that they are the largest generation in the U.S. population, about 75.3 million. They've been shaped by technology, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the future, they value family, creativity, work. They get married later, which is sort of interesting, and they have extreme buying power. I think that's probably the most important of all of these for us to be cognizant of. And may I add that while I was writing this portion of the presentation, they were sitting on both sides of me at Starbucks. I was literally surrounded by them.
They are literally everywhere.
They're literally everywhere. And in the not-too-distant future, they may be your boss. This idea of sort of founders and leaders, people like Mark Zuckerberg, you're seeing this more and more where younger individuals are taking business ideas to market in a way that connects and grows very quickly. Their leadership style is very different. Their communication style is very different. So, it's just something to be mindful about in terms of, from a business perspective, what role they play today and they will continue to play.
Right.
One project that I love this project. It's a few years old, but I still think it has great applications specifically to this market, is a project that was executed by Goodwin Procter. We worked with them on it, which was sort of this mini site or targeted site specifically for founders, people who were building businesses. And it was very much built with the millennial founder in mind, and was sort of bringing all the information together somebody who was starting a business would need. I think it does a great job of connecting with that audience.
Right.
One of the things that's really interesting is that we always say that, assume that millennials are, just totally driven by technology, are doing 5 things at once and able to, multitask and all these things. And I think one of the things that what we learned as we were doing this research is that, millennials are humans.
It's shocking, but it's totally true.
And some of the misconceptions that we might have about them are, not necessarily what we should take forward. This is a study that actually Kalev found where they watched a millennial sort of using different types of, it was a screen recording session where they followed what kinds of content and sites they were interacting with. And at the beginning, they were sort of like multitasking, looking at lots of different things, sort of like not having the attention to absorb all the information at once. And finally, they just got down to 2 because doing 5 was too many.
Yeah.
So then they ended up just, working on a research paper they had to do for class and watching Sons of Anarchy, which I think is actually quite appropriate.
Totally doable. I think what's really interesting, a lot of what I do is connect user experience with marketing aims, and I think what's really fascinating is that, I can get very skeptical about a lot of the stuff that's written by millennials. It makes them sound so strange and different, and a lot of it does end up to like those wacky kids. But when you look at their behaviors, they're really not that different. And data like this is real and it's actionable. I mean, what this slide says is that they are apt to multitask, but they're no better at it than anybody else because they are humans, right? So they're more likely to multitask, but they are highly distractible, right? And so they, end up needing to focus just like everyone else. And in general, they are really, if there's one general overriding aspect to a UX person's work when it comes to addressing millennials, it's knowing that they're sensitive to just having a good interface. Like having an easy and simple user interface is a big part of how they judge a brand.
Right, which is actually, this is one of those infographics I was referencing earlier, the many millennial infographics out there, but this is kind of an interesting one where it talks about like sort of misconceptions about millennials and then the reality. But one thing that you were saying was that they really demand an integrated and seamless experience regardless of the channel. They are, they grew up with the Google experience, and that's sort of what they come to expect. And if your brand does not deliver sort of sophisticated, seamless experience, they actually will feel like there's something wrong with your brand.
Yeah, no matter how good the actual message is or whatever, or how good the visuals are, if it doesn't work well, it's going to negatively impact.
So just a preview of next year's webinar. Don't get too comfortable with the millennials. I know that we've all sort of obsessed with them right now, but partially that's because we're sick of talking about the baby boomers, and this is the next big cohort out there. But what we're going to see in the next couple of years is that we're going to have to delve into new generations and understand new behaviors. Generation Z is the next generation or cohort that's coming out there. And it'll be interesting to see how that group sort of evolves. One thing I should say is that in true, I guess, Generation Z-ish fashion, they actually did a crowdsourcing exercise to come up with their names.
What to call it?
Through MTV, and they want to be called the Founders.
Yeah, naturally.
So, don't get too caught up with the millennials. I happen to have, yes, I happen to have firsthand experience with Generation Z. This guy might be the next Zuckerberg or managing partner. Imagine trying to sell something to him. I mean, it's impossible to even get him to eat. So
it looks like he would just put it in his mouth, whatever you were trying to sell.
So be afraid, be very afraid.
Right. Okay. Markets of one. This is another really fascinating presentation, and it's going to connect a broad idea with actually some specific digital tactics. So what do we mean by that? I'd say like it's been a trend for a while that I think marketing and business development have come closer, and we're actually seeing a lot of pressure for them for those two functions, which are often completely separate and siloed. And I think some of you on the phone would say like maybe they're even completely different teams with their own leads and their own budgets, right? But there's pressure for them to unite their tactics around areas like lead generation and nurturing. And BD people are asked to put more thought into their communications. And marketing people are asked to saying, like, you're not just, getting the brand out there every time. Like, you need to generate a lead and you need to nurture it. And as part of the response to this pressure, we've seen this trend called account-based marketing really kind of take hold. It's not hard to understand the core idea. It's basically where you market to specific key accounts or individual prospects. Right? You're asked as a marketer to arrange your content on that. And there's a few stats in here just about what a big trend this is within the B2B world. 86% of B2B companies have some notion of an account-based marketing or a key account program that actually aligns marketing to it. And 41% consider it a top priority for the B2B marketing and sales. Of course, the real question is how do you make it happen? Because, agreeing that key accounts should receive customized marketing and sales, that part's easy. We all think, like, the top client should get it. And it can sometimes be a bit of a battle, but most people can get through just identifying who counts as a key account and who doesn't. But the idea, and this is, I think, from the CMO's perspective, of then saying, okay, now customize all their marketing communications is just really daunting. Right. Obviously, I have to customize everything for all of those key accounts. So that's where people, I think, are really looking to digital, and this is where personalization comes up. And we've been talking about it for a while, and I think it's part of the big momentum behind personalization. I think it keys right back to account-based marketing or this notion of marketing one. I think personalization is the tactic that people are looking for to achieve that kind of account-based marketing as a strategy. This is, most people, when we start talking about it, to think about Amazon, this is actually a screenshot from my own personal Amazon recommendations page, so they're making fun of it. But what I think is really fascinating is it's hard to see probably on the WebEx, but up here I bought a book.
I love that you have elements of style.
Yes, totally. I do have the elements of style. But I have a book here called Change by Design, How Design Thinking Transforms Organizations. And Amazon, because it's really good at business, that anybody who buys a design book must be in need of Post-it notes. Which obviously is totally true. There's probably
and colorful ones, too.
There's probably 20 different stacks of different colored Post-it notes in my office as we speak. It's totally authentic. And it's just a good example of how Amazon could make, because when you think of everything that Amazon does and sells, this personalization is key for them to clear up the clutter and get you to stuff you actually need, right? If you had to start at the beginning and browse through a ton of categories every time you need something, you just wouldn't use it.
I mean, one of the things that for, us B2B professional services marketers is, these experiences on Amazon, we all say, well, of course, but experiences on Amazon are sort of changing our expectations in how information is delivered to us. And there's an expectation that you're going to know me and you're going to give me information based on what you know about me.
Absolutely. It's all about knowing the person. So I did pull a couple of stats. There's a really great report, which I recommend you go read if you're interested in personalization, from PwC, paired with Forbes on it. It's a 30-page report. It's filled with information. Here's just two stats. When they ask how important is personalization for reaching customers, 94% of all the respondents said it was either critical importance or pretty big. But then when they took a look at what they call the trailblazers, which are the really high-performing marketing organizations, 100% of the high-performing marketing organizations, the personalization is critical. And when we think about it, we change it to B2B, we often think about content rather than, specifically a product. And here, we shift from looking at Amazon to really aggregation sites. So things like Flipboard and Apple News are both great examples of sites that combine what we call implicit and explicit personalization. And in a nutshell, that's looking at what topics did I tell you I want to look at, but also looking at which ones do I click on and which ones am I actually reading. They're very smart engines that observe your behavior and just continually tune what content they're presenting to you. And this is where I think a lot of professional service and B2B organizations, this is the type of thing they want to do on their site with all their content marketing activities. However, it's growing from there, and this is how much momentum and how exciting personalizations become. But it's not just about automated suggestions or curation. There's so many different forms of personalization. Sometimes it's not web-based. It can be through a CRM or email personalization, that notion of a newsletter that's not really a newsletter. It's high-touch and very individualized, but there's still automation behind it, right? It's not the same. Nobody gets the same newsletter as anybody else, right? Or even UX personalization, actually changing the user interface or the design. We often think what would your homepage look like if it could be different for the clients you already have versus the people who have no idea who you are. And these are the ideas that are being discussed. It all goes back to exactly what you said, Jen, this notion of demonstrating importance to the relationship, saying, I know who you are, I know what you care about, and I care about our relationship. I'm going to show you a couple really cool examples. This is from the North Face. It's a personalized search, and a video here is just going to show you how to search through it. You come to it, you say, what kind of jacket do you want? I say, put in, I'm going to be in Chicago in February. I tell it that I'm a guy. It goes away and it looks for a little bit. Now what it's doing is using IBM's Watson to look at the conditions in February in Chicago and check out what the weather's like, and then it's going to match. Now it's not done. So it says, what kind of precipitation do you expect? I live in Chicago, so I know it's going to be snow and drizzle, pretty awful. And then I was stumped. It said, what activity? I don't really do sports, so I put in shopping. And then it put, what color do you prefer? So, again, gray. And finally it comes up with a recommended jacket, right? I didn't have to hunt through filters. Nobody's search experience is the same. It's almost leapfrogging personalization to full, almost individualization. It's truly intelligent search. This is something that's taking personalization and actually breaking the search experience. It's very un-Google-like, right?
And we talk about this a lot with clients in terms of, people are willing to give you some information about themselves if they think that you're going to give them back something of interest to them. It doesn't all have to be sort of heavy data mining or sort of insight finding.
It's all about the transaction, right? Information for value, right? People will absolutely give up information in order to get value back. Another really great example, it just came out last week or earlier this week, Quartz. If you don't know the Quartz site, they're kind of like a Flipboard or an Apple News or news aggregation site, so some new articles. Now, they could have launched a personalized app like Flipboard or Apple News, but they would have been competing against people that have already got that kind of browsing experience nailed. So they changed the experience altogether. So instead of browsing through news, you text and you query for news. So this is just some screenshots in the app. They come up here, they have a little bit of onboarding, and then they ask, they tell you a little bit about the news. Here's something about the Zika virus, and you can answer, this thing that says that, starts with the scariest thing about Zika. It's a potential link to babies with abnormally tiny brains. It's the part we understand the least. And then it gives you responses. Anything else, or that is scary, you can dive in or skip to anything else. And you basically have this text-like response to news. You're only getting as much information as you want at any one point. It is paying attention to what kind of news are you responding to, or do you want to dive in, and changing up the recommendation. So it's again, a completely individualized experience in this Quartz app. Nobody's seeing necessarily the same stories. Nobody's diving into the same stories with the same depth. It's a completely new way to approach the delivery of news information to users. So next up,
the everything effect. This is one that I feel very passionate about, and I think I am the core example of this. And I have a confession to make. I'm not proud, but I yell at my computer when it's slow, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like this. We have become conditioned to expecting everything to work, everything technology to work really fast and to be available right now in whatever format I want, no matter where I am, which is, I understand, totally unreasonable, but I don't care. I want it anyway. So we're calling this the everything effect. And it's, it has to do with this on-demand economy, which is all about the now and transparency. And, it's things like Uber, that application has changed our lives. We not only call for a taxi, we can actually see the taxi coming to us. And there's some sort of comfort in knowing that, in actually seeing it happen, that appeals to buyers and consumers today. I was just thinking about the fact that how interesting it would be to have some sort of app like that for the delivery of complex legal matters, or
where's my lawyer now?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that's not going to happen, but quite interesting. So you see things like Instacart, you see things like Uber. I find myself, and I'm sure that you do too, even though Amazon will deliver same day to you, it's often not fast enough. Everything is just so, the speed at which things are delivered is increasing. And I know there's many people on the phone that are saying, that's great, Jen, but you're talking about Amazon, you're talking about, Uber, all these sort of like consumery businesses. It's interesting, I was reading an article in VentureBeat where they were talking about like the next wave of these on-demand type of products are coming from B2C to B2B.
Yeah, absolutely.
So companies that couldn't compete or that found an opportunity outside of B2C are now sort of focusing on B2B. And one of the things that I clipped from that article was that they're coming for you, insert legacy industry here. And I think that that's something that you have to be mindful of, is that any sort of inefficiency or any sort of lag in time, there will be someone that comes out with a way of improving that experience.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find I don't have my, lawyer or consultant or banker on a map and check where that person is, but just the core notion of the transparency and the immediacy of information, right? Like nobody knows you can't deliver the actual service you're selling. It takes months or years, right? But the immediacy of information, eliminating can I have this, you go away for a day, come back, send it over, making everything synchronous instead of asynchronous is, I think, the key.
I think, the insight, the customer insight there is that there's something unsettling when you don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
When you know what's,
silent.
Yeah.
You don't like it. Right.
So just a few things to sort of check yourself as it comes to the on-demand everything society is that, consumers want to interact anywhere at any time. They want to do new things with disparate kinds of information. So thinking creatively about what information you have and how someone might want to access it is sort of interesting. They will expect you to use the information that you're capturing from them to be used to target to their specific needs. We talked about that a little bit before in Markets at One. And they will expect all interactions to be easy. And this is the result of the on-demand, everything now sort of generation. Orchestration. So speaking of, we get a lot of questions from people that start off with things like, how do I do lead generation? Or what is this marketing automation thing? And I think that this all comes from the fact that we are all sick to death of the fact that there are 6 million tactics out there that we can use in the past 10 years, content strategy, digital strategy, all of these different tactics that you can use to sort of communicate with different audiences. There's just been this proliferation of different communications and communication channels. B2B marketers are now average active use of 13 tactics. So it's just sort of more complex, and it's not like it used to be the good old days when you just used to buy a TV spot during the Super Bowl and you were done for the year.
Or just like this year, even the last 5 years, it's not like we need to launch a blog or we need to get video. Most people have all that.
Right.
That's the point of this graph. They don't need to adopt more digital tactics
Right.
or another social network. They need to know how it's supposed to work together.
Exactly, which is the tricky part. One of the core issues that started with, how do we be digital? I think that was the core issue that we started with, and now it's sort of like, how do we coordinate all these things in an integrated manner that's actually going to move the needle in terms of whatever our marketing or our customer objective is. So that's why you've seen this sort of like, you can call it whatever you want. We're calling it marketing orchestration, but some people call it omni-channel, some people call it marketing automation. We like the word orchestration because from our standpoint, it's not just a technology issue. It is a people issue, it is a content issue, and it is a technology issue.
Right. I think, one of the things that we talk about, so we're going to take a few themes as you think about marketing orchestration. One of the things that we pay attention to in our work is paying attention to the possibility of brand fade. So this is a PwC campaign that, as it comes out, if you launch a piece of content, then they put it out on YouTube. That's great. It gets mentioned by somebody on LinkedIn. That's fantastic. Now it's in a Forbes article, and then it's on a blog, like an industry blog. And this is, for a content marketer, this is 110% success. Right? You put the content out there, and it's just having further and further impact. But what's fascinating from a brand standpoint is that it's going farther and farther away from the context that you as a marketer can control, right? And to go back to the idea of brand that we brought in earlier, you can't rely on the visuals, like the logo and the colors, or maybe even the infographic that you put into the article to create that brand association. That brand association has to be inside that content in order for it to build the equity that you need. Because by the time you see here, it gets to this industry blog, you pretty much got the name of the original organization, PwC, but you've got nothing else of the visual brand architecture. So if you want a brand association, it's got to be inside the content. Here's a really great example, I think. This is an example from BCG, again, but I think this is a really great example of brand integrated content. So integrating that brand association, it's not just about sharp editing, like making sure the tone and the style is right. It's about choosing the right themes, formats, the narrative approach, even the target audience. Like, who are you writing to? Who are you writing for? And their partnership with TED is a really great example. This creates very strong brand associations for BCG, but their logo, their colors, their fonts, their editorial style is nowhere to be seen on here. Right? But the content, the associations are inside the content itself. What you have is BCG people talking about really thought-provoking, groundbreaking ideas that connect business and society. That goes right back to the Make the Difference message that we saw on their homepage in the career section. You can see how it all ties together and is unified by that core brand. The good thing is, social media is an example. There are some stable patterns that are emerging. We know that our annual reports do not belong on Pinterest, for example, not the right channel. Right? Darn it. Right? As before, I think we were putting it everywhere. We have a better sense of it. But even as we get into that, we think about this. We use this metaphor of the Cannonball, right? Which is really thinking about the big campaign when you're thinking about marketing organization and what's that key piece of content. These are usually big pieces of thought leadership. They're created and distributed in multiple contexts over a long period of time, and that timing can be really important.
Yeah, I think, especially when we're working with our clients, knowing that, there could be budgetary constraints, there could be people constraints in terms of people creating this content. I often think that if you think strongly about your brand, you have a very clear vision of what it is that your brand is trying to communicate. If you have a couple of key content pieces, put your efforts behind that. That's sort of the idea behind the Cannonball, sort of pick some really meaty topics and own them, and then, use your cadence and the distribution of the content in a way that gives it a long shelf life.
Yeah, I think many people are stuck in a way that, they launch that big report. They might know that it's happening. Sometimes they don't know that it's happening. They launch it when it's done. They get their social media person to post it out a couple times. And, they think they've done a campaign. And the truth is, one of the key aspects to a true campaign is this notion of the cadencing,
Right.
And this is how you make the most of it. So this is actually the same example deliberately that we used for the brand phase, and what we're doing is showing you what happens before and after the PwC annual global survey. It's probably the biggest report they do all year.
Mm-hmm.
But before the launch, they do a really good job of having their CEO actually, their global leader, actually do tweets ahead of the launch, and, maybe a little bit of a stat like this is coming, or I'm going to be doing it at this event, see you there. Of course, at the launch, there is a big campaign,
right?
And they launch the website that comes with it. People can download the report. There's some great infographics. But then also, after the launch, you can see people in PwC continue to send out snippets over months afterward. And there's absolutely marketing intent behind that. And then they're releasing the videos of the participants to sort of keep the whole energy going.
I think no, it's fine. One last thing I was going to say, sort of, once you have your core brand message, and then the next essential from a content and an orchestration standpoint is a solid editorial plan,
right.
Or editorial calendar. And I think that once you have those two pieces, it makes the process of orchestration a lot easier.
Right.
Okay, so now we're getting down into the micro trends. So we'll go through these. So this one I'm calling Digilog Mashup, which is this idea of, I feel like we started off with the .coms, and then we went away from, then there was no more .coms, then it was back to brick and mortar, then it was sort of we'll have a .com, and then maybe we'll still have a brick and mortar, and now it's there is a place in this world for both of these channels to live.
Work together.
Exactly. And they're actually more sophisticated, retailers are doing this in a more sophisticated way based on their understanding of how people want to buy, how people want to be serviced. And, I think Amazon, I know we've used them a lot, but this is a great example. The picture on the left is essentially, one of their pickup locations is actually in London, and then the one on the right is an article talking about their new retail stores that allegedly they have one in Seattle, but allegedly they'll be coming out with a string of retail stores. And the interesting thing about that is that the hypothesis is that it's not because of the retail store, it's because of the data that they're collecting at the retail store, and it's all seamlessly integrated with their Amazon app so that you can sort of download or, interact with the shelves in real time. So it's sort of interesting. A few things, that we just need to know is that, there are places in the buying cycle for both online and offline. In B2B specifically, the salesperson, the consultant, the lawyer plays obviously a critical role, and they own so much information that they have context around. So, it's not one or the other, it's really both. And not surprisingly, we're seeing things like in-person events and webinars sort of having a very human piece to them, but also being some of the most effective B2B tactics. One thing that I will say about this, and I'm sure that you would all be nodding your head, is that this idea of Digilog sort of blending these different online and offline channels is hard. It's hard because it takes a lot of work, and it's hard because it's not all in one department.
Yeah.
If it's all in marketing, you can kind of get it done because you don't have to ask anyone else. But as soon as you have to start dealing with other people, forget it. It's going to take longer and be more complex than you thought. That's of course coming from a marketer.
Pretty precedent.
Yeah.
I think it's doable, but it definitely gets to this notion. That alignment is key. Looping back on themes, you see how they are fitting together. That's the key to authenticity, is making sure that people have a consistent experience.
Yeah.
And I know that we talk a lot about it, and we word about it very often. We say digital has to meet analog. But if you're a marketer that's running in-person events and investing a lot in your website, that's something that you need to be thinking about a lot.
How the two work together.
Right.
I love this sample from IBM of sort of how different tactics could work across different channels based on where someone is in their buying cycle. I think doing an exercise like this is pretty simple and allows you to at least see it at a high level, where you're putting your energy.
What you could do is use Post-it notes.
You could use Post-it notes. Correct.
What we would do. The service design, I'm not sure how many people have heard this term. It's really up and coming. I'm going to show you a little bit I'm going to actually first just define it. I think it's bigger in B2C space, but I think it's really gaining steam within the B2B space. In its simplest form, service design is the application of design thinking to the delivery of customer services instead of products, right? So we're used to things like UX design and digital. We're used to product design or industrial design with regards to physical product. Service design is saying, let's take the same thing to the delivery of service. And the consumer side, that might be hotel service, might be airline travel. We have an example from that, those kinds of services. And then B2B, actually, you have to think, yeah, this is directly the delivery of legal services, consulting services, financial services, anything that's where you're not actually handing over a physical product. Like user experience design, but like those other branches of design, it is ultimately derived from industrial design and human-centered design. And so its methodologies are user-centric. This is a model. There are many of them, service design models, but they share the same basic phases, right? They start off with a research phase. It's very ethnographic, meaning they're very deeply embedded in the potential buyers, that customer's world. And then they get to definition of concept or vision. They go through a design process, and that leads to a production quote-unquote model. Of course, it's a service, not a thing, but then that's sort of continuously measured and tweaked over time. And the tools, actually, if you're familiar at all with visual UX design, they use many of the same tools. They're very recognizable. They use personas. They map out journeys. They have things like touchpoint maps when you get in later. Very similar to what you just saw at IBM from a marketing perspective. So you can see the applicability of it to a lot of marketing. So that raises the obvious question, like, how is it different, right? And the truth is, in terms of the tools and its approach, it's not very. A lot of research, personas, journeys, that sort of thing. There's a huge amount of overlap. The main difference is that, like, on the UX side, for example, digital design, it's a little bit more quantitative. It is digital, virtual. It tends to focus in on details. We talk about new technologies. We mentioned personalization. And it tends to go really deep. Service design is broader, a little bit more qualitative, and definitely looking at those analogs, interactions as well. So uniting the two of those, which you could literally and very simply just call experience design, is, for example, is essentially a way to achieve that Digilog alignment. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a technique, if you're thinking, like, how do I get my website like my in-person events, this notion of taking a service design approach to things is basically how you do it. Now, there are many examples of them. I couldn't find a lot of great case studies for B2B that I could show you, because sometimes they're very abstract. Sometimes the outputs of it are not incredibly visible. But here's one. If you come to any modern airport, which means not O'Hare,
or LaGuardia.
No, or LaGuardia. But let's say any other airport in a decent city, you've probably experienced the outcome of it, because airlines have been all over this. And this one's from Virgin Atlantic. They did a service design project focusing in on Heathrow and their experience at Heathrow, and it covered everything. So they did a user journey. You know, you can see here before the airport, outside the airport. They mapped out what people would like. They took a look at even just like flow maps for foot traffic and realized they were making people kind of loop around. You had to go in one place to check in and then literally turn around and go in the opposite direction to go somewhere else. They kind of clarified that. And they've introduced a lot of major changes that you've probably seen in other airlines. The self-check-in kiosks, those were not so that they could, like, not hire as many desk agents. That was not the point of those. The point of those was to make the interaction really efficient. Like, sometimes I just didn't need to talk to somebody. I just needed my boarding pass. That was it, right? They changed their lounges, airport lounges, for they call them literally upper class passengers. They used to have, like, a defined work area, a defined eating area, a defined discussion area, and they realized that nobody wants to work like that, or that's not how people want to use the lounge, because I want to move from one activity to another. And so they created the lounge, and everybody pretty much copied them, that had these sort of mixed-use areas where you could sort of do all things at once. You could work, eat, you could talk to people, all the way down to that super high-end customer experience, where if you drive up to the airport, somebody will approach you, take your bags, check it in, get you through. So you skip the entire check-in process, and that's led to a 75% reduction in check-in times. Yes, even for the economy people, it means it takes 1/4 of the time it used to check into your flight, and a 30% increase in overall satisfaction. So now we're on to the last digital details. These are the quick trends, and we're going to flip through these pretty quickly. There's a lot of great examples in here, though, so definitely we'll post the deck, and you can show them. You can take a look at them later. Now, these are the types of stuff that used to dominate, I think, our trends presentations. They're not as big, but I think they're fun. And I definitely think if you're looking for inspiration for 2015, you should look at these. So big imagery, still really big.
Oh, look, we're on
it. No, we're part of this trend, too. Everybody's doing it. But now there's a lot of attention to what are you doing with it. And this example is from Make Me Pulse. It might be hard to see, but there's sort of this grid layout that kind of reacts to the mouse. There's a lot of interactivity going on with these big images. It's not just an image anymore. And I'm going to break out very briefly and actually start showing you some sites. So this is Burns McDonald site, which is an architecture, engineering, and design firm, and in full disclosure, we did work on the site, but this is a great example of what people are doing with some of this big imagery. They have essentially an entire brand story that's going on here. So you notice it's animated, it's reacting to what I'm doing on with the mouse as I start to explore the content, and you can choose things and kind of go through different pieces of content throughout the entire site, and you're really seeing it respond to the user. To go back to what we were talking about, the next thing is Flat 2.0. So if you've listened to any digital trends, you know, flat design is huge, not going anywhere. But it does turn out that sometimes flat is just flat. It does have a negative side. And I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that, you know, this is an example of a footer from a site, but it shows an example of like what happens with flat design, because on the testing for this, users get really confused over what's clickable or what's not. You might think because it's in darker type that the word shop or about Alaska or contacts is clickable. That's actually not true. It's the gray stuff that's clickable. But of course, graying something out is a way of saying it's inactive. So you're seeing, like, when you reduce things so much, you actually lose signifiers about what a user's supposed to do. So this is where Flat 2.0 comes in, and it's really about introducing a bit of non-flat stuff back in. Shadows, transparencies, some gradients, 3D layers, and movement to sort of help people figure out the interface. And the biggest proponent of this is Google with its material design guidelines. Right, so you can see here showing, you know, different kinds of shadows. These are not the big shadows and gradients that we saw in the past. They're pretty subtle, but they help people understand that that box maybe just isn't just a container for content. Maybe I can touch it. Maybe it can do something, right? And they also pay a lot of attention to literally the physics, how things animate. Do they animate in a natural way, or are they just sliding across the screen? Another big aspect is performance of design. So this is you yelling at your computer. We, as designers, often say we blame the phone. So ever since Apple and Google put the web in our pockets, we've been kind of frustrated. Designers have been kind of frustrated. We used to be on these desktops that were fast and had great internet connections, and now we're on this phone and it's like a 90s dial-up line. It's slow, and the device is small. And then you get airplanes, right, where it's even worse, right? You just can't count on everything being super speedy. But our expectations have risen at the same time, right? 40% of users will start to abandon a site if they have to wait more than 3 seconds for it to load.
That seems like a lot of time.
It is, yeah, it's forever, right? In our minds, right? And there's just stats from everywhere. I mean, here's some in this slide. I'm going to quickly go past this, but the point is faster is always better. You reduce page space, and you will get more interaction on your site. So what do we do about it? We think a lot about mobile networks, even when designing for desktop screens. It's not just the small screen anymore, and that means removing a lot of low-priority content and design elements. A lot of people, that's kind of heading in a good direction anyway. You know, cleaner, better, sleeker. We're embracing white space. We're also testing on real-world devices. And if you're curious, this is definitely in the full. This is the, like, you know, design agency confessions. You know, you test the speed of a site using Google's page speed insights page. You can put in any site there, and it will tell you what might be slowing it down. And
somebody in our technology group is swearing right now. We
did it right before this webinar, and we found that, like, hey, we have something to pay attention to. But it's a great tool if you're curious about your site. If specifically there's like one page in your site that's really slow, put the URL in here, and you'll get a little bit more information about what might be making it slow. Next really cool thing, timelines. I used to hate these things. I mean, I used to really hate them. Everybody had this sort of like firm or corporate history timeline. They were really bad. for the most part, and boring, and they took up a lot of time and money. But now they're back in some really cool ways. I'm going to...
Chorus Down doing it well.
We've got Downton Abbey going in, a really awesome timeline from the New York Times, so you can sort of slide off. That's super important right now. I'm going to show you Ross Spiral very briefly. This is an education firm, curriculum development firm, and they have this gorgeous animated timeline that shows different topics and courses as they get played out across different grades. My favorite, however, is probably Google's Museum of the World, done with the British Museum. It's just super dynamic. I'm going to clear the cookie message just so that we can get to it. And it shows you how, again, different themes play out over time. And another reason why I like it is because it actually kind of reminds me of Guitar Hero, but it's about history. And you can slide back and forth and, again, see themes play over different continents at different times. Now, I just showed you lots of really cool ones. The obvious answer is, like, could you do it in a more professional context? And the answer is absolutely. Here's GE, just blowing apart the idea of what a corporate timeline or firm history timeline picks. They centered on this idea of transformation, and they've created another really great interactive way of showing the content. So just to kind of quickly wrap through some of the others, we do have a lot of, we've probably seen a lot of design, a lot of grid-based design. That's a good thing. Aligning things to a grid makes it more easy to be responsive. It keeps things clean. But we're beginning to see a lot of sites kind of play around with the grid and try to break out of it. So here's one from Curious Space, another one from Phases Magazine, and another one actually from the SNCF, which is kind of like France's version of Amtrak, that you can see designers actually saying, let's break out of the grid, it is better, actually. Sorry, Amtrak.
Probably really good too.
Yeah, well, people are speaking in French, so it certainly feels fancier. But the point is that, people are starting to play around with it because the grid is a good design discipline, but it's beginning to make sites feel the same, right? Now, if you were counting carefully, you would notice that we promised you 15 trends, and we only gave you 13.
So that's not good.
No. So I feel like we need to do 2 more.
Yeah, so we came up with 2 trends that we hope die in 2016. The first is the flower beards. For those of you who may have gone to Coachella, you probably saw that quite frequently there. We're just hoping that goes away. It's too far. It's gone too far.
Yeah, you're definitely an annoying hipster if you wear flowers in your beard.
Also not work appropriate.
No, not work appropriate, not work appropriate.
And the last one is
Yeezy.
Yeezy by Kanye West. I mean, so he...
I don't even know what is he... I don't know what Yeezy is, but I know it needs to go away.
Well, it's his fashion brand, which most people said looked like something from Star Wars.
Is that not him? Is he not Yeezy?
Yeah, he is. But, so anyway, those are 2 things that we hope we don't see any more of in the future.
Yeah, if I have to come back next year and put those up on the trends, I'm going to be really sad. So it's only you people can stop Yeezy.
And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you have a question, you can submit it using the chat function located either in the lower right-hand corner of your screen or within the green drop-down bar at the top of your screen. We're going to take just a minute here to collect the questions we've received, and we'll be right back to start the Q&A session. We're actually just going to wrap things up, running a little short on time. So if we weren't able to get to your question, or if you come up with another question about anything mentioned in today's webinar, feel free to contact marketing@onenorth.com. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your day.